a business deal. I mean, most religion is in a sense like a business deal. I mean, what is a priest? It's somebody who intercedes for you to the gods. He's a businessman carrying out the transaction. And that's what the Pharaoh was. He was carrying out the transaction of making sure that his country, was getting its fair share. So when the Pharaoh went into battle, he would come back with lots of booty, and he would give its share to the temple. And then the temples would look on Egypt, and divine order would be restored. But, we've got slave girls wearing lapis. That's not right. That's not right. Everything had its place. You know what it's a little bit like? In Elizabethan times, during the time of Shakespeare, there was the belief in the great chain of being, that everything had its place. And they drew up these long diagrams of how the world was structured according to God's plan. At the top, of course, is God. Beneath God are angels. There's seraphim and cherubim. These are orders of angels. And beneath the angels, you've got man. And of course, there's a hierarchy there. At the top, you've got the king. And beneath him, the lords. And beneath them, the peasants. It goes all the way down. Beneath man, you've got the plants and animals. There's a king of the animal world, the lion. And you've got lions going down. And then you've got the plants. Now, I don't know what the king of the plants is. Maybe it's broccoli. I don't know. But then beneath the plants, if they're alive plants, you have the minerals. The lowest of the low. The insensitive things. Right? So there was a sense that everything in its place. There was an order. A divine order. And that's exactly what the Egyptians believed in. Divine order. They called it Ma'at. Ma'at was a goddess. But also she represented truth, justice, and order. Right? She's often shown, by the way, with a feather on top of her head. That's the hieroglyph for true. Means truth. Also...
Well, hello there, people. Just getting started, so you didn't miss anything. He mentioned Ma'at. I've heard that term before around the internet. And it's pretty much what he said it is. It represents truth, justice, and other principles. It's deep. That word, that term is deep. I'm trying not to get into it because I want to do a later video where I reference that. Man, this stuff is deep. This is like beginning of the world type stuff. You know, the things that went on in Egypt would echo throughout life itself. You know, other people, other lands would go on to emulate what Egypt did in some form or fashion. And it's interesting to know that it's like finding out that your great grandparents did something in the community and somebody's kid was watching them diligently like a student, and they went on through life and became this great person that everybody looked up to. And it was no secret that the reason why that person is so great is because of what your people taught them. It's like, man, they learned all that from great grandpa. They learned all that from great grandma. Like, man, I didn't know my grandma got down like that, boy. She was something else, boy. You know, sometimes greatness isn't always what you yourself do, but sometimes it's the knowledge that you impart on somebody else. How can I say this? How other people perceive you. What other people learn from you. And what they do with that information. You know, like I said, somebody take you up under their wing and they tutor you. You shadow them, and then you move on in life and you do great things. Well, you can never say that you weren't influenced by those earlier teachers. Sometimes we learn our greatest lessons not in the classroom, but outside the classroom.
Justice. So there was this divine order, and that's what they were upset about. Divine order was turned upside down. Let me give you another example. In this lamentation, continuing, he says, "None indeed sail north to Byblos today. What shall we do for pine trees for our mummies?" Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is he wants the great old days of Sneferu, when Sneferu sent out expeditions to Lebanon, to Byblos. That's what he's looking for. He's looking for the good old days. Now, why do you need pines for mummies? The answer is pine trees were the source of resin. And in order to make a good mummy, you needed resin. After you dehydrated it, you covered the face with tree sap to kind of seal it in. And resin was the way you stuck it together. The mummies were wrapped in bandages, but they didn't have regular glue. They used tree resin. So when he says, "None indeed sail north to Byblos today," he's really saying it's not like the good old days of Sneferu. And that's what he wanted, the good old days of Sneferu. So things are really bad. And he says, this lamentation, what shall we do about it? All is in ruin. Things are really bad. He says, "Lo, every have-not is one who has." That's just the wrong thing. There's no more sense that, you should really give to the poor or anything like that. No, the poor are supposed to be poor. That's what they're there for. And he's got loads of interesting little tidbits. He says, "Lo, those who were entombed are cast on high ground." What he means right, is that people are robbing the tombs. Right? They're robbing tombs, taking the bodies out, and casting them up. Remember, tombs are down in the ground, and people are going into the tombs, taking and throwing them out. Right? To this day, there's a parallel to that in Egypt. The ancient Egyptian word for a cemetery was often the city of the dead. They called it that, houses of the dead. And today in Egypt, there's a city of the dead. It's the modern cemetery in Cairo. And housing is so bad in Cairo that there's something like 500,000 people living in the tombs in the cemetery in Cairo called the city of the dead. And it's acknowledged by the government even because they've run in electricity for these people, so they just live in the tomb. So some things never change. But he goes on. He talks about this inversion of wealth. He says, "Where is a fine linen?"
Wait a minute. They got people living in tombs. They done kicked out the dead bodies. How do you kick? They've evicted dead people out of their final resting place so they can have a spot. The government, I believe that's what he just said, the government knows about this and they cool with it. Like, I don't care how bad times get, I'm not sleeping in no cemetery. No, I'm dang on sure not getting ready to go dig up no bodies so I can throw a mattress in there. Sorry, Grandma, but I need this spot. Nah. That's pretty bad. When you uprooting the dead just so you can have a place to lay your head. That, man. But that just goes to show you how bad things can get. Like the old expression, you think you got it bad? It could get worse. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty bad. Wow. Evicting the dead out of the cemetery so they can have a spot to lay their head. That's crazy. Continuing.
are beaten with sticks. Right?
What?
Not very good. And he continues. He says, ladies suffer like maidservants. Right? I mean, the idea is that maidservants are supposed to suffer. That's their place in life. Right? He says, lo, all maidservants are rude in their speech. When the mistress speaks, it irks the servants. Right? Things are bad. Now, this is just one example of Lamentations. There's another one which is called the Prophecies of Nefertiti, and it's supposed to take place in the time of Sneferu. Now remember, Sneferu is my hero. He's the one who shows Egypt how to build the pyramids. But he's also the guy that they all look back to as the great days. I'll tell you, 1,000 years after Sneferu was dead, 1,000 years after Sneferu was dead, when a pharaoh did something great, they said, not since the time of Sneferu has its like been done. Right? So Sneferu was kind of like the good old days. And there's prophecies that supposedly take place in the time of Sneferu. Somebody is going to make predictions for Sneferu of what's going to happen. And he predicts the first intermediate period. Now, it's not a real prophecy. It's written during the Middle Kingdom. It's looking back, but it's got some wild stuff. It says,
now, these people are lamenting. They're talking about how bad things have gotten in Egypt, and they're reminiscing. You know, they're reminiscing about the stories they've heard about the great days, the good old days. You know, that would be like, for us today, that would be like, you know, that favorite great uncle that you had that always came around once a year around Christmas and gave everybody presents. And when mama was having problems paying the bills, he came through and paid the NIPSCO, you know. Invited everybody to his house during the summertime. Man, I miss great uncle, boy. He was cool, boy. Well, it could have been the grandfather or the great-grandfather or your favorite auntie, you know. It's like that. It's along those lines. So I get that, you know. When you got that patriarch in the family or that matriarch in the family that hold the family together, you know, big mama, you know, auntie, when they gone and things get tough, is a lot of times that's all you can do is just think back to how it used to be. Man, I miss Gigi. She held it down, boys. She kept everybody in line. But yeah, I get that. For these people, you know, Sneferu was that guy. He was that guy. You know, he kept Egypt together. He built monuments, you know, pyramids. So yeah, totally get it. Continuing.
lo, the great no longer rule the land. What was made has been unmade. See, they had tradition. What is made has been unmade. What's been unmade? The pyramids. They've been robbed. During this first intermediate period, there was no bodyguards. There were no police state. There was nothing. It was anarchy. So the pyramids are big, hulking targets. And that's when the pyramids of Egypt are robbed. That's why we never find a body in a pyramid. They were all robbed during the first intermediate period. And this man is lamenting. He says, lo, the great no longer rule the land, meaning people like Sneferu. See, you're going to get a theme throughout all the Lamentations. It's first, divine order is upset, and second, we need a champion. We need the king to come out on his horse and ride in with his hat and save us. That's what Egypt always turned towards, a champion, somebody to save them. A couple more things. It's deeper than political problems they felt. It was the gods are angry or something. He says, dry as the river of Egypt, one crosses it on foot. Now that's something very elemental. Even nature is against Egypt. Things have turned against Egypt and they don't know why. He continues, there's more. He says, the land is bowed down in distress. owing to those feeders, Asiatics who roam the land. Again, there's something wrong. Foreigners are entering into Egypt. Remember, Snefer is the one who called himself the smiter of barbarians. He's the one who went into the Sinai. Things are bad. And he says, desert flocks will drink at the river of Egypt. Now, what does that mean? Desert flocks will drink at the river of Egypt. What's wrong with that? The answer is that the desert flocks are the Bedouins, the people of the desert. You see, it's a common misconception that the Egyptians were desert folk, riding into the desert on their camels. Egyptians hated the desert, feared it. They didn't have the camel till much later, till the Romans introduced it. The Egyptians stayed away from the desert. Everybody in Egypt lived along the Nile, where the water was, right? So the desert was feared, and the people of the desert were to be kept at arm's length, keep them out. So now he says, desert flocks will drink at the river of Egypt, take their ease on the shores for lack of one to fear. In other words, in the good old days, those Bedouins were afraid to come near our river. They had to look for wells and stay away. But now they come and take their ease and are what? Things are really bad. See, Egypt was interesting towards foreigners. They didn't really like foreigners in the beginning. Egypt was the place you wanted to be. It was the place where you had to be buried. It was the place where you lived. It was the best place on earth. You know, when a foreigner went to when an Egyptian went to a foreign country and it rained, now the Egyptians never saw rain, hardly ever saw rain, they said, it's curious, they have their Nile in the sky. And they viewed it as really unfortunate. You know why? They had to just wait for it to come. I mean, you had to, like nowadays, you know, sometimes there's a drought. And sometimes it rains too much. But the Nile, at least, was always there. So Egypt was the best place on earth. And during this intermediate period, it had ceased to be the best place on earth. Why? They must have wondered. They just didn't know. I'll give you one last goodie or two of this Lamentations. I love Lamentations because it gives you an insight to what these people felt about the land. He says, the land is ruined. Its fate decreed by the gods, right? Deprived of produce, lacking crops, right? Everything's gone. It says, I show you the master's need. The master needs something? Incredible. Never would happen. It says, the land is shrunk, its rulers are many, it is bare, but taxes are great. So people, they're not producing, the Nile is perhaps dry, and they're still being taxed. Something's really wrong. See, taxes were a symbol to Egypt almost. You know, Egypt is probably the first country that really taxes its people systematically. Egypt was the largest bureaucracy in the history of the world. Think about it. If you've got a strong central government, you got an army, you got to pay that army. How do you get the money, the goods, to pay the army? Egypt didn't have any currency. There was no currency in Egypt. They did barter. It was grain for clothes and this and that. Well, the way you paid the army and the priests and the people who didn't contribute to the society is you taxed the peasants. And how did you tax them? You didn't go and say, give me 1/5 of your grain. No. Because they could cheat. They could hide the grain. They could say we had a bad year. The peasants were taxed by how high the Nile rose. There were Nilometers, measurements of the Nile, carved on boulders in the river. And depending upon how high the Nile rose, that's how you were taxed. If the Nile rises, say, up to 22 feet, you're taxed this amount. You should be able to grow this amount of crops if the Nile is this high. You grow that much, you pay it. If you don't, say you had a bad year, you still have to pay that amount. Doesn't matter. You can't hide your grain. If you're lucky, you grow more, you just have to pay that amount. But you're taxed not on how much you grow, but how much you should be able to grow with a Nile of a certain height. So this man's saying, there are no crops, and the taxes are great. Things are really bad. And he says, one salutes he who was saluted, right? In other words, you're saluting the wrong guys. You know, you're saluting, it's saluting the guy who should be saluting you. And then he says at the end, he says, men will live in the graveyard. A beggar will gain riches. The slave will be exalted. Things are terrible. Divine order is upset. Now, it's from texts like these, which is literature, can't be taken perfectly literally, but we get an insight into what's going on in the intermediate period for 200 years. Now, why do we have to go to texts like these? Well, one thing is that we don't have the official records. Another is that Manetho, our good source, is very scant, 70 kings in 70 days. And there's another reason. The King's List didn't help us much. But the other reason is that in the beginning of this intermediate period, the capital was at Memphis in the north. And Memphis is a lost city. See, the water table is higher in Memphis. And that means that buildings sink down. It means that papyrus, on which records are written, rots in the moisture. And if you try to excavate at Memphis, it's very difficult. You dig down 3 feet and you're in water. You're in water. It was excavated by Flinders Petrie, my man, the excavator in the 19th century, and he went around with an iron rod poking in to feel where the stones were under the mud, and then tried to get the mud out, dig up a stone. But most of Memphis is under the mud. It's gone. It's a lost city. So when I tell you the history of Egypt, I'm really not telling you, in a sense, the history of Egypt from the north. What we know is the history of Egypt from the south, where it was always dry and we have more records. It's kind of like looking under the lamppost for your watch, even though you didn't lose it there because the light's there. It's all we have really are southern records. So another reason why the intermediate period is so difficult to study is the capital, Memphis, is gone. Now, there's good news. For nearly 200 years, Egypt was in this period of anarchy. The good news is it rises again. It comes out of the mire. We're going to get the champion that they want to unify Egypt. But that's for next time. I'll see you.
So, towards the end, he was talking about how Egypt is going to come out of this little funk that they in. Amazing. Taxes. We all can relate to that. We all can relate to taxes. Who can't relate to taxes? Some people say, what? They had taxes back then? Yes, my guy. They had taxes back then. That was one of the first places that had taxes. So yeah, even back then they had taxes. But you gotta also remember, this is the intermediate period. So you got bad leadership, foreign invasion, and most foreigners that invade a place want most of the riches for themselves. So they're going to tax the people more. No different from having, in my opinion, it's no different from having a crooked government that preys on the poor so they can get wealthier. Like they say, the rich get rich and the poor get poor. Yeah, it's true. It's true. It takes a special case for somebody in the inner city, poor, broke, probably living in the projects, to come up and stay up. And most times, you never hear from them again. Once they get out, oh, they gone. Where's Reggie at? Oh, ain't nobody heard from him about 10 years. He came up and didn't look back. Can you blame him? Really? I mean, some people might say, oh, well, he should have looked out for his people when he came up. Yeah, but at the same time, on the other side of that argument, some people might say, why should he? Why should Reggie look out for his people when he came up? Was his people trying to help him while he was down and trying to come up? If he was doing it on his own, if he was struggling on his own, why should he share? That's just how some people feel. And on that note, I'll chat with you good people next time.